What would you do if the woman everyone in the courtroom had already decided was selfish, reckless, and beyond excuses, suddenly said 7 words that made an entire room stop breathing? And what if the judge everyone trusted to see through lies looked at her, saw something nobody else saw, and answered in a way people would never forget? Hit that subscribe button if you believe one moment of mercy can change a life. Because before this story is over, a young mother will walk into court with her head held too high, her voice too sharp, and her heart barely holding together. And by the end, even the people who came ready to judge her will be wiping tears from their faces. Like this video, if you believe justice should have truth before punishment. This was the kind of morning people in Providence remember for years. The kind that starts ordinary and ends as a story shared at kitchen tables, group chats, and lunch breaks. The kind of case that makes strangers say, "I saw the clip, but you had to be there to feel it." Drop a comment telling us the moment you realized someone was carrying more pain than pride. Courtroom 3 at the Providence Municipal Court sat under flat fluorescent lights that made everything look colder than it was. It was Friday, October 17, 2025, 9:12 in the morning, and the docket had already been moving fast. Parking violations, red light tickets, one expired registration after another. The usual shuffle of sighs, paperwork, low voices, and that dry scrape of shoes against old tile. The courtroom smelled faintly of coffee, wet coats, and printer toner. A few people in the gallery were half listening, half scrolling on their phones. The clerk, Angela Martin, kept the stack of files in perfect order. Bailiff Tom Hennessy stood near the side door with his hands folded in front of him, expression unreadable. Then the next case was called. Case number 25 TC 11847, Angela said, clear and practiced. Companion citations 25 PK 9041, 25 PK 9042, and 25 MV 3308. Elena Rosario. The woman who stood up looked no older than 26. She wore a tan H&M coat with one loose button, a white Old Navy blouse that had been ironed sometime long before sunrise, and black Nike Revolution sneakers so worn at the heel that they leaned slightly outward when she walked. Her dark hair was tied back, but not neatly. A few strands had dried stiff against her temples, as if she had brushed away sweat and never checked a mirror afterward. In her left hand was a thick accordion folder packed with papers. In her right was a phone with a cracked screen and no case. She walked to the podium like she was walking into a fight she had already decided she would not lose, no matter what it cost. And that was the first thing people noticed about Elena Rosario. Not sadness. Not fear. Defiance. She didn't look broken, she looked braced. The second thing they noticed was the edge in her voice. "Good morning," Judge Frank Caprio said, looking over the file. "Let's save time, Your Honor," Elena replied before he got another word out. "I know why I'm here, just tell me what I owe." A ripple moved through the gallery. A man in a Carhartt jacket muttered, "Wow." An older woman with a floral scarf raised her eyebrows and leaned back in her seat like the show had finally started. Even Angela, who had heard every tone imaginable in that room, blinked once and looked back down at the paperwork. Judge Caprio didn't change expression. That was one of the reasons people respected him. He had heard anger, arrogance, excuses, charm, and manipulation from thousands of defendants, and he had learned a long time ago that the loudest voice in the room was rarely the strongest one. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Elena again. "You are charged with operating a motor vehicle with a suspended registration, failure to obey a traffic control signal, expired inspection, and 3 unpaid parking citations in a restricted medical zone. You also failed to appear on the initial hearing date." "I was aware of the list," Elena said. "That's why I asked for the number." The room turned sharper around her. She had gone from defensive to unlikable in less than 10 seconds. Share this with someone who needs to see what happens when a courtroom stops at the truth, instead of the attitude. Judge Caprio folded his hands. Miss Rosario, I usually begin by asking people what happened. And I usually don't explain my life to strangers, she said. There it was, not just a hard edge, a wall. Somewhere in the back row, a young guy in a navy puffer jacket actually laughed under his breath, not because it was funny, but because people laugh when they sense a collision coming. The atmosphere tightened. The bailiff glanced over. Even the heating unit near the back wall seemed too loud in the silence that followed. Judge Caprio lowered his chin slightly. That may be, he said, calm and measured, but when your choices affect other people on a public street, your life becomes relevant in this courtroom. For the first time, Elena's eyes flickered. Not much, just enough for someone paying close attention to know he had hit something real. She set her folder down with more force than necessary. My choices, she said. That's fine, let's talk about choices. The judge opened the citation report. Date of offense, June 14, 2025. Time, 8:14 a.m. Location, Broad Street in Eddy near the approach toward Rhode Island Hospital and less than 6 blocks from Hasbro Children's Hospital. Vehicle, silver 2012 Toyota Camry LE. Registered owner, Elena M. Rosario. Reporting officer, Daniel Mercer, Providence Police Traffic Unit. The written summary was not flattering. Vehicle observed bypassing stopped traffic by entering temporary bus lane. Horn used continuously. Driver proceeded through yellow turning red. Pedestrian crossing partially obstructed. Near contact reported by crossing guard. Driver verbally noncompliant during stop. Suspended registration confirmed. Driver warned regarding unsafe operation. In short, the kind of case that usually makes sympathy very hard to earn. You understand, Judge Caprio said, that according to this report, you did not merely have paperwork issues. You drove in a way that endangered people. Elena didn't back down. Nobody got hit. The reaction in the room was immediate. A soft gasp, 2 whispers, 1 disbelieving shake of the head from the woman in the scarf. It was the wrong sentence. Everyone knew it. Judge Caprio's voice stayed even. The standard is not whether tragedy happened. The standard is whether you risked causing it. Elena lifted her chin. Then give me the penalty. At that point, most people in the room had decided exactly who she was. Another person too proud to admit fault. Another defendant who thought a hard life exempted her from rules. Another young parent using pressure as personality and attitude as armor. And maybe that would have been the whole story. But then Judge Caprio noticed something sticking out of the overstuffed folder she had slammed on the podium. A blue plastic hospital bracelet, small enough for a child's wrist. He didn't mention it, not yet. Instead, he asked the next question. Who was in the vehicle with you that morning? Elena answered too fast. No one. And from somewhere inside the courtroom, maybe memory, maybe instinct, maybe the little tremor in her voice that no one but the judge seemed to hear, the first crack appeared. Because Officer Mercer's body cam log, clipped to the file, said otherwise. 2 juveniles audible in rear seat. The judge looked down at the paper, then back up at Elena, and for the first time all morning, the silence that fell was not judgment. It was curiosity. And that was when everything started to change. Angela Martin passed the judge a printed still image from the surveillance camera mounted above the intersection. The monitor on the side of the courtroom flickered on with that pale security camera color that makes every day look like bad weather. The timestamp in the top corner read 6/14/2025-08-14-22. The silver Camry was halfway out of the lane, angled around a line of cars waiting at the light. A crossing guard in a reflective vest had her arm extended. A woman with a stroller had paused at the curb. Elena's car looked frozen in the exact second before a very bad decision becomes a very bad outcome. The gallery leaned in. Now it wasn't just a file. It was footage. And footage changes people. Reports can be argued with. Words can be spun. But when a room sees an image at the same time, truth gets louder. This is the surveillance still taken from the city traffic camera, Angela said. Judge Caprio nodded once. Thank you. He looked at Alina. Do you dispute that this is your vehicle? No. Do you dispute that you entered that lane? No. Do you dispute that pedestrians were present? Alina swallowed. No. So why, the judge asked quietly, did you tell me nobody else was in the car? She did not answer. A muscle jumped in her jaw. Her hands, which had seemed steady before, now gripped the edge of the podium so hard her knuckles went white. It was a small thing, but in a courtroom, small things tell the truth before mouths do. Everyone could see it. The same woman who had sounded untouchable 30 seconds ago suddenly looked like she was standing on cracked ice. Then Judge Caprio asked for the body cam footage. The screen shifted from overhead surveillance to Officer Mercer's perspective. You could hear the stop before you fully understood it. The long, wet hiss of traffic on morning pavement, a horn blaring, a child coughing, the sharp chirp of a police radio. Then Mercer's voice, controlled, trained, a little strained. Ma'am, put the vehicle in park. Alina's voice came back harsh and breathless. I said I heard you. License and registration. You can see I'm reaching, can't you? Ma'am, lower your voice. No, you lower yours. I have children in this sea. Art. The courtroom stirred again. She had lied. There it was on video. Mercer's body cam tilted slightly. The lens caught the back seat for a split second. A pink backpack with a Disney Frozen keychain. A gray booster seat. A little sneaker kicking weakly against upholstery. Then the camera moved back. Are the children injured? Mercer asked. No. Are they sick? Silence. Ma'am, I asked if they are sick. And then Alina snapped the line that, for months, would define how everyone who saw the clip felt about her. Write whatever you want, she said. I don't have time to perform for you. The gallery reacted exactly the way the internet reacts when it only has half a story. A man near the aisle whispered, unbelievable. A woman in scrubs frowned and crossed her arms. Someone behind the last row exhaled hard through their nose in disgust. If this had gone online in that moment alone, without context, millions would have made up their minds in under 10 seconds. That was the outrage beat. It hit hard. A young mother, 2 children in the back, reckless driving, attitude toward an officer, zero remorse. Judge Caprio let the clip run longer. Mercer asked again for the registration. Alina shoved papers toward him from the passenger seat. A child whimpered. Another coughed. Mercer's voice shifted from enforcement to concern. Ma'am, look at me. Do you need rescue? No. Do either of your kids need an ambulance? No. Then you need to calm down. The next words came out of Alina like broken glass. If I calm down, everything falls apart. The clip ended there. The room went still, in a different way this time. Not because she had been proven innocent. She hadn't. The driving was still dangerous. The lie was still a lie. The disrespect was still real. But that last sentence landed. If I calm down, everything falls apart. There are some sentences that feel rehearsed. That one did not. That one sounded dragged straight out of a life lived at emergency speed. Judge Caprio looked at the citation notes again, then at Alina, then at the folder on the podium. Miss Rosario, he said, gentler now but still precise, you were wrong to drive that way. You were wrong to lie to this court, and you were wrong to speak to the officer the way you did. Alina stared at the wood grain on the podium. Yes. It was the first soft word she had spoken. Now, the judge continued, I am going to ask you again, who was in the car? This time her voice cracked. My daughter Lucia, my son Matteo. How old? Lucia was 6, Mateo was 3. The room seemed to inhale. Judge Caprio nodded once. And why were they with you that morning? Elena's mouth opened. Closed. Her face changed almost imperceptibly, the way a sky changes just before rain. Her expression was still guarded, but the force behind it was weakening. She looked over one shoulder toward the gallery, not at anybody specifically, just toward all those strangers waiting to hear whether she deserved what came next. Then she said, "Do I have to say it out loud?" Judge Caprio didn't rush. "In this courtroom," he said, "truth is often the only thing that can help you." Before Elena could answer, Bailiff Tom stepped forward and handed Angela a late-submitted envelope that had just been brought in from the clerk's intake window. White, creased, marked with black ink, "Attention Court, Medical Documents, Elena Rosario." Angela opened it, looked at the contents, and her expression changed. She passed the envelope to the judge. He read the first page, then the second. And when he looked back up, the entire mood of the room had shifted, because whatever was in that envelope had made even Judge Caprio stop and take a breath before speaking. "Miss Rosario," he said, "why didn't you bring this up first?" Elena's eyes filled instantly, but she still didn't cry. "Because," she whispered, "people hear one hard thing about your life, and they think that's permission to own it." Nobody moved. Not the clerk, not the bailiff, not the people in the gallery, not even Elena. And then Judge Caprio said the words that sent a chill through the room. "We need to slow this case down. Like this video, if you believe the full story matters before the sentence does." Angela placed the medical records flat on the bench so the judge could read from them without folding the pages. The top sheet bore the logo of Hasbro Children's Hospital. Patient, Lucia Rosario. Date of treatment, June 14, 2025. Time of arrival, 7:03 a.m. Chief complaint, acute asthma exacerbation with oxygen desaturation. Secondary note, mother reports inhaler depleted overnight, recent housing instability, child exposed to elevated mold conditions prior to displacement. That one line changed the air inside the courtroom. Recent housing instability. Exposed to mold conditions prior to displacement. Those were not the phrases of a careless person having a bad morning. Those were the phrases of a family already in freefall. Judge Caprio turned. Another page. There was a pediatric follow-up note signed by Dr. Sunil Mehta. There was a discharge summary stamped 7:52 a.m. There was a copy of a prescription for albuterol solution. And tucked underneath was something more powerful than any defense speech Elena could have made for herself. A social worker intake memo from Janelle Price at Safe Harbor Family Shelter. Temporary emergency placement approved. Mother declined transportation assistance due to work loss concerns. Child Mateo presents with selective mutism symptoms. Mother appears sleep-deprived and hypervigilant. Family recently fled domestic violence environment. You could feel the gallery turning against its own first impression. The floral scarf woman who had looked annoyed before now pressed her lips together. The man in the Carhartt jacket lowered his eyes. The woman in scrubs, who had crossed her arms during the body cam clip, unfolded them and sat forward. People weren't suddenly excusing Elena's choices, but they were realizing they had judged her from the worst 10 seconds of her worst day. Judge Caprio set the papers down. "Miss Rosario," he said, "the court record now indicates you and your children had been placed in a shelter 2 days before this stop. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And your daughter had just been discharged from the hospital after trouble breathing." "Yes." "And your son was also in the car." "Yes." "Where were you headed?" "To Little Stars Daycare on Cranston Street first, then to Bayside Linen on Allens Avenue." She swallowed. "I had an 8:30 shift." "Why not go home?" A tiny, humorless laugh escaped her. "We didn't have one." That landed harder than anything else so far. No performance, no dramatics, just a fact. We didn't have one. One of the things that made Judge Caprio so compelling in moments like this was that he never let sympathy erase accountability, and he never let accountability erase humanity. He understood something most people miss. Two things can be true at once. Alina could have been under unbearable pressure and still put people at risk. She could have been victimized and still made wrong choices. She could deserve correction and compassion in the same breath. So he asked the next question. Why did you fail to appear for your first hearing? Alina's eyes shifted again. There it was, another place she did not want to go. Angela checked the file. The initial hearing date was August 1, 2025. What happened that day? The judge asked. Alina rubbed one thumb against the side of her cracked phone, over and over, a nervous motion so small it almost disappeared unless you were looking for it. I couldn't come. That is not an answer. No, she said, voice getting harder again. It's the answer I have. The judge sat back slightly, not offended, evaluating. Miss Rosario, when you only tell half the truth, you force everyone to guess the other half. That usually does not go well for the person asking for mercy. That was quote number one people would later post in the comments by the thousands. When you only tell half the truth, you force everyone to guess the other half. Alina shut her eyes for a second. When she opened them, they were glossy but still dry. My mother had surgery that day, she said. I was at Roger Williams with her. She needed someone to sign discharge papers because my brother works offshore and my sister lives in New Bedford. I brought proof. She pulled another sheet from the folder. Hospital visitor verification. Teresa Rosario. Procedure date, August 1. Alina M. Rosario listed as responsible family contact. There was an audible murmur. The case was getting heavier, not lighter. Every answer raised the emotional stakes. Every paper made it harder to fit Alina into the neat box people wanted to keep her in. But then Prosecutor Cheryl Donnelly, seated at the city table in a charcoal suit and pearl earrings, spoke for the first time. Your Honor, if I may. Judge Caprio nodded. Donnelly stood, organized and crisp, voice professional. The city acknowledges the medical documentation, and no one here is disputing that Miss Rosario was dealing with serious stressors. However, the pattern matters. 3 unpaid parking citations in restricted medical zones over a 6-week period, suspended registration for non-payment, failure to appear, and the underlying traffic stop includes a near pedestrian event. This is not a single lapse. It is repeated noncompliance. The temperature in the room shifted again. Just when sympathy was rising, consequence stepped back into the frame. Donnelly continued. There is also notation of an earlier verbal warning issued on May 28 in the same vehicle for parking in a fire lane outside an urgent care entrance. Alina stared straight ahead. Not a fluke. A pattern. That mattered. The gallery felt it. The emotional balance tilted once more. Was this a struggling mother trapped by circumstances, or someone using suffering to soften the edges of habits? T hurt everyone around her. The story was changing again. It was bigger than one bad morning, and now the people watching needed to know which truth would win. Judge Caprio looked at Alina. Did you receive a warning on May 28? Yes. Why were you parked in a fire lane? I was carrying my son. To urgent care. Yes. For what? He had a fever of 104 and was shaking. Why not move the car after? Because they admitted us. Another murmur. One by one, the citations that looked like carelessness were beginning to line up against emergency rooms, urgent care visits, and impossible choices. But still, none of that changed the image on the surveillance still. None of it erased the risk to the crossing guard, and the court was not going to pretend it did. Judge Caprio folded his hands again. I want Officer Mercer to come forward." The officer stood from the back row, where he had been waiting in a dark navy uniform with traffic insignia on the shoulder and a body camera mount clipped, empty, to the center of his chest. He was in his late 30s, square-jawed, the kind of face that looks stern until it smiles. He took the witness position and swore in. "Officer," the judge said, "on the day of this stop, what did you observe?" Mercer answered carefully. "I observed the defendant bypass stop traffic using the bus lane. I observed her enter the intersection as the light changed. I observed a crossing guard, later identified as Dollars Keene, step backward to avoid potential contact. I initiated the stop immediately." "Did you believe the situation was dangerous?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you believe the driver was deliberately aggressive?" Mercer hesitated. That pause mattered. "At first," he said. "At first. Yes, sir." "And later?" Mercer glanced at Alina, then back to the bench. "Later, I believe she was panicked." The room tightened all over again. Judge Caprio leaned forward. "Explain that." Mercer nodded. "When I first approached, she was combative, but there were indicators. The younger child in the back seat wasn't speaking. The older child was wheezing. There was a nebulizer machine case on the floor. The vehicle was cluttered in a way that suggested recent displacement. Laundry bags, children's blankets, unopened pharmacy items. She kept looking at the rearview mirror instead of at me." He paused. "That usually means the real emergency is not the driver. It's behind them." Alina finally looked at him. It was the first time she had looked at anyone directly since the hearing began. Mercer continued. "I asked if she needed rescue. She refused. I asked if I should call medical. She refused. I cited her because the driving was dangerous, but I also radioed ahead to advise there might be a pediatric respiratory situation if she was continuing toward care." The prosecutor asked, "Did Miss Rosario cooperate?" "No." "Did she tell you the truth about where she had been?" "No." "Did she verbally challenge your authority?" "Yes." "Did any of that make the stop more difficult?" "Yes." Donnelly sat. The facts were balanced again. Mercy had a case, so did accountability. Then Judge Caprio asked one more question. "Officer Mercer, in your professional opinion, was she reckless or was she desperate?" Mercer looked at Alina for a long second. Then he said, "Your Honor, I think she was a desperate person driving recklessly." That sentence split the case down the middle. Not innocent. Not malicious. Desperate and dangerous. Human and wrong. And just when it felt like the courtroom had finally found the truth it could settle on, Angela Martin lifted another page from the intake envelope and went pale. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "there's one more attached document." "What is it?" Angela looked at Alina, then back at the page. "It's a family court filing." Every head in the room came up at once. And Alina, who had been fighting tears like they were an enemy, turned white. "Drop a comment telling us whether you think pain explains behavior, or if rules have to stay the same, no matter the circumstances." The family court document should never have been mixed in with traffic filings, but clerical accidents happen more often than people realize, especially when defendants bring papers from 5 different agencies in one overstuffed folder, and every office stamp looks urgent. Still, the moment Angela said the words family court filing, the courtroom felt like it had moved from traffic violations into something far more dangerous. Judge Caprio did not read it aloud immediately. He looked at Alina first. "Do you want a moment?" That question almost broke her by itself, because proud people can survive criticism much more easily than kindness. Criticism gives them something to fight. Kindness takes away the armor. "No," Alina said too quickly, "just read it." He did. Temporary custody motion. Petitioner, Raymond Vega. Basis alleged, unstable housing, unsafe transportation of minor children, failure to maintain lawful vehicle registration, concern for emotional well-being of children. The sound in the courtroom was not a gasp this time. It was something lower, heavier. The sound a room makes when everyone understands the consequences at once. It wasn't just fines. It wasn't just points on a license. It was ammunition. Every unpaid ticket, every missed court date, every hard sentence on that body cam, every reckless second in that intersection. Her ex had turned all of it into a weapon. Judge Caprio looked over the top of the document. Is Mr. Vega the father of your children? Yes. Is he seeking custody? Yes. Was this filing active at the time you missed your first hearing? Alina's voice nearly disappeared. Yes. Did you fail to appear because you were afraid this traffic case would be used against you in family court? She didn't answer. Miss Rosario. Yes. There it was, another revelation, another turn. Suddenly her attitude looked less like contempt and more like survival. If you live long enough in fear, you start treating every question like a trap. Every official desk looks like a threat. Every mistake feels fatal. That doesn't make lying right, but it explains why honesty can start to feel impossible. Judge Caprio set the family filing aside. Was there a domestic violence order? Alina stared at the podium. Yes. Active. Expired. Violation history. She swallowed twice. Prosecutor Donnelly intervened. Your Honor, I would caution that this court is not the proper venue for litigating family matters. Caprio nodded. I am aware, counsel. I am not litigating family court. I am determining credibility, context, and the appropriate outcome in this matter. That was another line people would remember. Justice is not blind to suffering. It simply refuses to lie about it. He didn't say it as a performance. He said it because the whole room needed to hear the philosophy guiding what came next. Alina's shoulders, so rigid at the start, had begun to sink by degrees she probably didn't even feel. The combative edge was still there, but it no longer looked like arrogance. It looked like exhaustion with teeth. Tell me about Mr. Vega, the judge said. She said nothing. Not because she didn't want to, because she couldn't begin. And in that silence, the courtroom learned the next thing about Alina Rosario. When pain is old enough, language often fails before memory does. Judge Caprio changed approach. Where were you living on June 14? At Safe Harbor for 2 nights. Before that, with my mother. Why did you leave? Silence. Miss Rosario. He found us there. The words came out flat, dead, the kind of flat that only comes after enough chaos has burned all the drama out of fear. Did he physically harm you? The judge asked. Yes. Did your children witness it? She nodded. No one in the room shifted now. No whispers, no side comments. The earlier energy, that small hungry appetite for courtroom spectacle, had evaporated. This was no longer entertainment. It had become one of those moments where ordinary people are forced to confront how little they know about the strangers they judge in passing. Judge Caprio asked, and the children? Lucia started sleeping in her shoes, Alina whispered. Mateo stopped talking around men he didn't know. That sentence turned the whole story. The little boy in the back seat on body, Cam who never spoke. The little girl wheezing while her mother fought a traffic stop like her whole life was on the line. Now the room understood something that had not been visible in the footage. It wasn't just traffic panic. It was trauma with a steering wheel. Officer Mercer lowered his eyes. Even he looked affected. The judge continued gently, Miss Rosario, I understand fear. I understand emergency. I understand what it means to think one more mistake will collapse your whole world, but I need you to understand something too. You cannot drive like that with children in the car. Your suffering does not make the crosswalk empty." Elena nodded once. That hurt because it was true. Then he asked, "Why didn't you ask for help?" The question seemed to offend her more deeply than anything else had. From who? From the shelter, the hospital, the court, the officer, anyone. A bitter laugh escaped her. "You want the honest answer?" "Yes." "Because every time I asked for help from anybody in the last year, it came with a form, a lecture, a wait list, or a warning that if I couldn't hold everything together, somebody else would decide whether I was a fit mother." No one spoke. That was the kind of line viewers would clip, replay, and quote because it felt too real to be written. Every time I asked for help, it came with a form, a lecture, a wait list, or a warning. You could see Judge Caprio absorbing it, not because he agreed with giving up on help, but because he knew she wasn't making an excuse. She was making a confession. The prosecutor rose again. "Your Honor, with respect. The city still has a public safety concern. Miss Rosario's explanation may be compelling, but the dangerous operation remains. So do the unpaid citations." Caprio nodded. "I have not forgotten." Then he looked back at Elena. "Did you ever renew your registration?" She closed her eyes. "I tried." "Tried?" "I paid online in April. The charge came back. I didn't know until May." "Why did it come back?" Another silence. The judge waited. "Because the account it was linked to was closed." "Your account?" "No." "Whose account?" "My husband's, well, ex. We weren't divorced yet." She pressed her lips together. "I thought it was still open." "Did he close it?" "Yes." That little detail was devastating in its ordinariness. Not a dramatic crime, not a movie villain move, just financial sabotage, the kind that destroys people quietly and leaves almost no visible bruise. Angela found a DMV printout in the file. There's a note of attempted online payment dated April 22, returned for insufficient account status. The judge nodded slowly. "And why are the medical zone parking tickets unpaid?" Elena looked ashamed for the first time, truly ashamed. "Because if I paid those, I couldn't buy the prescription." "For which child?" "For both." That was when the woman in scrubs in the gallery covered her mouth. She knew, in a way others maybe didn't, how many bad decisions begin as math problems no one should have to do. Pay the ticket or buy the medication. Register the car or miss the shift. Tell the truth and risk custody, or lie and risk looking guilty. The case had become a chain of impossible choices, each one wrong in a different direction. And still, the judge was not done asking hard questions. "Why did you tell the officer? Write whatever you want, I don't have time to perform for you." Elena stared at the courtroom monitor, frozen on her own face from the body cam footage. "Because if I opened my mouth any wider, I was going to cry. And I knew if I cried, he'd either think I was faking it or he'd take one look at my kids and decide I couldn't handle them." She swallowed hard. "And I couldn't risk either." For the first time, her voice shook hard enough that everyone heard it. The room had gone from outrage to disbelief to empathy, but the biggest turn was still coming. Because Judge Caprio reached for the last page in the file, studied it, and then looked directly at Officer Mercer. "Officer," he said, "your report mentions an additional audio note not included in the original playback. I want that portion." Mercer's head lifted. "Yes, Your Honor." Angela adjusted the playback file. The room became so quiet you could hear the faint buzz of the monitor speakers before the clip resumed. Mercer's voice, traffic, rain tapping lightly on the windshield. Then from the back seat, very faintly, a little boy's whisper. "Mommy, don't let him take us back." The whole courtroom froze. You could actually hear someone in the gallery gasp and then start crying. And Elena Rosario, who had walked in with a chin lifted like a weapon, lowered her head for the first time. Judge Caprio took off his glasses. Nobody in that room would ever forget the look on his face. Hit that subscribe button if you believe some stories should humble everyone watching them. There are moments when a courtroom stops being a place of procedure and becomes a place of reckoning. Not legal reckoning, human reckoning. That audio clip did that. It forced every person in the room to confront how much they had assumed, how easily they had turned a woman's worst posture into her whole character. A little boy saying, "Don't let him take us back." Not, "Don't let them give us a ticket." Not, "Are we going to be late?" Not, "Why is the officer mad?" "Don't let him take us back." That line exposed the entire emotional architecture of the morning. The panic, the hostility, the refusal to explain, the lie about who was in the vehicle. Elena had not been acting like someone above the law. She had been acting like someone who believed every authority figure might send her children back toward danger if she said the wrong thing. Judge Caprio put his glasses back on and spoke softly. How long had Mateo been saying things like that? Elena's answer barely carried, since the second time the order was violated. When was that? May. So when Officer Mercer stopped you in June, your son believed being stopped by a man in uniform could result in going back to the person he feared. Yes. Mercer exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. It was a tiny, human gesture, but it mattered. You could tell he was replaying the stop in his own mind, hearing the tone he had used, remembering the look in the rearview mirror. Officers are trained to evaluate danger. That day he had. What he could not fully know at the intersection was the shape of the fear already sitting inside that car. Prosecutor Donnelly asked for permission to review the audio transcript. After scanning it, even she softened. She was still a prosecutor, still obligated to represent the city's interests, but you could see the line between duty and cruelty forming clearly in her mind. Judge Caprio addressed Elena again. Miss Rosario, I am going to ask you a difficult question. I want a direct answer. Were you overwhelmed or were you out of control? That question mattered because it went to responsibility. People often try to collapse those two things into one, but the court needed the distinction. Elena took a long breath. Her lower lip trembled. She pressed it flat. I was trying not to lose control, she said, and that made me drive like I already had. There was quote number 4. I was trying not to lose control, and that made me drive like I already had. That sentence cut through the room like truth usually does. Not flashy, not polished, just exact. Judge Caprio nodded. That is honest. Then he said, but honesty that arrives late still has consequences. That was the kind of line only a seasoned judge could deliver without sounding cruel, because it wasn't cruel, it was clean. He reviewed the parking citations one by one. June 2, 11:07 a.m. Medical loading zone outside Pediatric Pulmonary Clinic. June 9, 2:14 p.m. Emergency Vehicle Access Area, Rhode Island Hospital Campus. June 14, 7:56 a.m. 2-minute standing violation near Children's Emergency Entrance. On June 2, he asked, why were you in the loading zone? Lucia had a pulmonary appointment. She was coughing so hard she vomited in the waiting room. On June 9, my mother passed out in the hall at home. I took her in because the ambulance wait was too long. On June 14, I had no quarters, my app froze. Lucia couldn't breathe and I ran. The judge closed the parking file. You understand how this sounds? Yes. How does it sound? Like I think the rules are for other people. And is that true? No. Then what is true? Elena's eyes filled again. That every week felt like whoever needed oxygen most got the parking spot. That line broke something open in the gallery. A man in the back shook his head and muttered, "Lord." The woman in scrubs wiped tears with the heel of her hand. Even Angela Martin, who had spent years protecting herself from every sad story by staying focused on precision, had to glance down and restack papers that did not actually need restacking. Because that was the thing about Alina's case. The details were so specific they became impossible to dismiss. No sweeping claims, no dramatic monologue, just one brutal reality after another. Asthma, shelter intake, expired order violations, a closed bank account, a little boy who went quiet around men, a grandmother in surgery, a mother calculating tickets against prescriptions. And yet the judge was still looking for the piece that didn't fit. He found it in the timeline. "Miss Rosario," he said, "your hospital discharge was 7:52 a.m. The traffic stop was at 8:14 a.m. The daycare you mentioned was less than 10 minutes from the hospital. Why were you still on Broad Street in that direction?" Alina went still. The room felt it immediately, another turn. She had answered everything else, quickly now almost with relief, but this question hit a place the others hadn't. Her eyes darted to the family court filing on the bench, then to the floor. The judge noticed. "You were not headed only to daycare and work, were you?" No answer. "Miss Rosario." Her shoulders rose with one deep, shaking breath. "No." "Where were you going?" Still nothing. Officer Mercer glanced toward the judge. Prosecutor Donnelly looked down at her notes, perhaps already suspecting what was coming. The gallery was silent again, every single person locked into the tension of the next sentence. Judge Caprio's tone remained gentle, but firm enough to hold the truth in place. "If you stop here, after coming this far, you will have chosen the one moment to lie that could ruin everything." Alina shut her eyes. Then she opened them and said, "I was going to the courthouse." The room erupted into whispers. Angela had to call for order. Judge Caprio leaned forward. "Which courthouse?" "Family court." "Why?" "To file before he did." "File what?" "A motion to keep the shelter address sealed and ask for emergency review on supervised visits." The implications hit like thunder. She had been racing not just against work and childcare and medication and time. She had been racing against him. Against the possibility that if she arrived too late, the first paper filed would shape the next stage of her children's lives. Suddenly that frantic route made sense. Dangerous sense, painful sense, human sense. But the court still had to face the law. Judge Caprio looked at her steadily. "So you took a dangerous shortcut with 2 children in the car because you believed being late to family court would put your children at risk?" "Yes." "And in doing so, you risked other people's children as well." Her eyes finally overflowed, not dramatic. Sobbing, just tears dropping silently, one after another as she nodded. "Yes." That was the breakthrough, the first real surrender, not to the court, to truth. And just when it felt like the hardest part had been spoken, Officer Mercer raised his hand slightly. "Your Honor," he said, "if I may add something not in my written report." The judge nodded. Mercer drew in a breath. "There's a reason I didn't arrest her that day." Everyone turned toward him. And what he said next changed the case all over again. Share this with someone who still believes mercy and accountability can stand in the same room. Officer Mercer kept his hands lightly clasped in front of him, not defensive, not theatrical. He sounded like a man trying to speak with precision, because imprecision would feel unfair to everyone involved. "When I first stopped Miss Rosario," he said, "I was prepared to escalate. Her tone was aggressive. She was non-compliant. The registration was suspended. The children were present. Under other circumstances, I could have requested additional units and removed her from the vehicle." Alina stared at him, stunned. Maybe she had never known how close the morning had come to turning into a very different kind of disaster. Mercer continued, but when she reached for the paperwork, a folded note fell from the passenger seat onto the floorboard. I saw enough to read one line. He glanced toward the judge. I did not include it in the formal citation because it wasn't directly part of the traffic offense. What did it say? Judge Caprio asked. Mercer answered. It said in a child's handwriting, "Please don't tell him where we sleep." The room broke. Not loudly, just all at once. The woman in the floral scarf put a hand over her eyes. Someone in the back let out a choked breath. Bailiff Tom, who looked carved out of granite most days, shifted his weight and stared at a fixed point on the wall. Judge Caprio did not interrupt. He let the emotional truth of the moment do what arguments never can. Elena's hands came up to cover her mouth. Her shoulders began to shake. She was still trying not to cry audibly, still trying to preserve some final scrap of control, and it was almost harder to watch because of that. Who wrote the note? The judge asked. Lucia, Elena said without lowering her hands. How old was she when she wrote it? She had just turned 6. Why did she write it? Elena finally lowered her hands. Her face was wet now, makeup gone, pride no longer protecting anything. Because she heard me tell the shelter worker not to say our room number out loud. The judge waited. She thought if people knew where we slept, they'd tell her father. There are points in a story where everything before them rearranges itself. That was one. Suddenly, Elena's hostility toward questions, her refusal to explain, her instinct to snap, her obsession with time, her suspicion of every official voice, all of it aligned into one pattern. She had come to believe information itself was dangerous. And then Prosecutor Donnelly did something no one expected. She stood and said, "Your Honor, the city would like to amend its position." That made every head turn again. Donnelly did not smile. She wasn't trying to look generous. She was trying to be fair. The city maintains the driving was unsafe and requires consequence. However, in light of the full context, including the attached pediatric records, shelter documentation, and the officer's testimony regarding the observed condition of the minors, we would withdraw any request for enhanced penalty. Even Elena looked shocked. But Donnelly was not finished. We would ask the court to focus on remedial measures rather than punitive ones. That mattered. It mattered because compassion is powerful, but compassion from the side people expect to be hardest is even more powerful. It told the room this was no longer about winning. It was about getting it right. Judge Caprio nodded. Thank you, counsel. Then he turned back to Elena. You came in here ready to fight everyone, he said. Why? She laughed once through tears, a small, broken laugh with no humor in it. Because fighting is cheaper than falling apart. There was quote number 5. Fighting is cheaper than falling apart. Comments would later call that one unforgettable. The judge let the silence breathe before speaking again. Miss Rosario, I want you to listen carefully. Pride sounds loud, but pain is usually the one doing the talking. Today, your pain did a lot of talking for you before your honesty finally arrived. Elena nodded, crying openly now. But I am also going to tell you this. You cannot raise children in permanent emergency mode. At some point, survival skills become dangers of their own. No one in the room could deny the truth of that either. He asked Angela for the DMV compliance summary. She passed it up. One missing reinstatement fee remained outstanding. $48, that was it. $48 had kept. EPT, the registration suspended. $48 had hung over months of stops and warnings and fear. Judge Caprio looked up slowly. $48. Angela confirmed it. Miss Rosario, why was that not paid? Elena wiped her face with both hands. Because the same week that fee came due, Mateo needed antibiotic suspension, Lucia needed the nebulizer refill, and my mother's cape hit. I had $52 left until Friday. The numbers were so small they were almost offensive. $4 left after choosing medicine over legality. The room felt that too. Officer Mercer added, "Your Honor, for the record, when I returned to my cruiser that day, I ran the children's names through dispatch only for welfare concerns and asked whether prior calls existed at the family address. There were. Multiple. I made a discretionary decision to issue citations and clear the stop without further escalation because I believed arresting the mother in front of those children would do more harm." Judge Caprio looked at him for a long second. "Officer, that was not an easy call." "No, sir." "Do you stand by it?" "Yes, sir." "That," the judge said, "is the difference between authority and wisdom." Another line, another quote, another moment the room seemed to store away. But the hearing still was not over. Because Angela Martin, flipping through the final pages, discovered a note from the Department of Children, Youth and Families. Routine notification only, no action taken, generated after the traffic citation due to the presence of minors. It had gone nowhere, but Alina saw the state seal and visibly panicked. "No," she said instantly. "No, no, no." Her breathing changed, fast, shallow. Her hands clawed for the edge of the podium. For a terrifying second it looked like she might faint. Judge Caprio's voice changed with her. "Miss Rosario, look at me. That is not an active removal notice. Do you understand me?" She was crying too hard to answer. "It is not an active removal notice," he repeated slower. "Look at me." She looked. "Are your children currently with you?" "With my neighbor, Lillian Vega." "Safe?" "Yes." "Fed?" "Yes." "In school and daycare?" "Yes." "Then breathe." It was one word, but it carried the weight of command and care at once. "Breathe." The whole room seemed to do it with her. She inhaled hard, shaking, exhaled again. And then, right there in open court, with fluorescent lights overhead and strangers watching and a file thick with mistakes in front of her, Alina Rosario finally broke completely. Not with anger, not with excuses, with truth. "I'm so tired," she sobbed. "I'm so tired of sounding rude when I'm scared and looking guilty when I'm drowning. I'm so tired of every piece of paper feeling like it might take my kids away. I know I drove wrong. I know I did. But I swear to you I was trying to hold my whole life together with one hand on the wheel." The courtroom went dead silent. That was the climax people would replay. The breakdown. The moment the mask came off and the room saw the person beneath the posture. Judge Caprio let her cry. He did not interrupt because sometimes dignity is not protected by stopping tears. Sometimes it is protected by allowing them without shame. And then, when the sobbing softened enough for words to matter again, he leaned forward and gave the line that would make millions say their faith had been restored. "A bad moment does not make you a bad mother," he said, "but a bad moment can become a tragedy if you refuse to change after it." There it was. Mercy without denial. Compassion without surrender to chaos. Truth without cruelty. Alina looked up at him like she had been handed air. But there was still one more twist waiting in the room. Drop a comment if that sentence would have stayed with you for years. The courtroom doors opened softly, and Bailiff Tom turned. An elderly woman in a navy raincoat stood just inside, leaning on a cane, breathing a little hard from the walk. Her gray hair was pinned neatly, and her reflective crossing guard vest was folded over one arm. Even before Angela whispered the name to the judge, some people recognized her from the surveillance still. Dollars Keene. The crossing guard. The woman Alina had nearly clipped. Every eye in the room snapped toward her. If there was ever going to be an anger witness, a victim statement, a final emotional blow, this was it. The room braced for outrage. Even Alina stiffened, terror flashing across her face. Because if Dolores came in angry, if she described fear, if she demanded the maximum, the moral balance of the whole hearing could tilt again. Judge Caprio asked, "Ms. Keene, are you here in relation to this case?" She nodded. "I am, Your Honor. I was told it was being heard this morning." "Would you like to be heard?" "I would." She took her time walking forward. Cane, step, cane, step. The sound echoed in the silent courtroom like a metronome when she reached the front. She didn't look at the judge first. She looked at Alina. And Alina could not hold her gaze. Dolores' voice, when it came, was stronger than anyone expected. "I was scared that morning," she said. "I won't pretend I was. I stepped back because I thought that car was coming through too fast, and if we were only talking about traffic, I'd say so plain as day." She paused. "But that isn't the whole truth either." Another turn. The room waited. Dolores continued. "About 4 months before that stop in February, I slipped outside the Stop and Shop on Manton Avenue. Ice under the slush. Went down hard. My husband had died the year before, so there was no one with me. People looked. Some slowed. A few kept walking. But one young woman with 2 little kids in a shopping cart left her own groceries half unloaded, knelt in that freezing mess, and stayed with me until rescue came." Alina slowly looked up. Dolores met her eyes and gave the smallest nod. It was her. There was a sound in the courtroom that no one could control. Not a gasp this time. A wave. A collective emotional collapse into understanding. The woman nearly hit in June was the woman Alina had helped in February. Life had circled back. Dolores went on. She gave one of her children a granola bar to keep them calm and used her own coat under my head while we waited. She didn't know me. She didn't ask if I had insurance. She didn't say she was late. She just stayed. Dolores looked at the judge. "So when I saw the footage from the stop later and recognized the car and those same 2 little children in the back, I asked myself a question. Was I looking at a selfish woman? Or a woman having the kind of day that empties a person out?" Not a single person in the gallery remained emotionally distant now. This was the forgiveness twist. Unexpected mercy from the person most entitled to anger. Dolores turned back toward Alina. "You drove wrong," she said. "You know that, I know that, but I'm not here to bury you. I'm here to tell the court I don't want fear mistaken for character." That sentence landed like scripture. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. Even he looked moved. "Ms. Keene," he said, "that is a remarkable statement." She lifted one shoulder slightly. "I've been on those corners for 19 years, Judge. You learn the difference between a reckless heart and a terrified one." That was another quote worthy of framing. A reckless heart and a terrified one. Alina was openly sobbing again now, but these tears were different. Not just collapse, relief. The almost unbearable relief of being seen by someone you could not have expected to defend you. And Judge Caprio, sensing the room had reached one of those rare emotional heights where anything false would ruin it, did not rush to verdict. He took a breath, looked at every document again, and then did something people still talk about. He asked Alina the simplest and hardest question of the whole morning. "Miss Rosario, if I give you a path out of this, will you take help instead of only taking punishment?" The room locked onto her answer. Because sometimes redemption turns on a sentence that simple, not whether someone is sorry, not whether they suffered, whether they are willing to do life differently if mercy opens a door. Alina nodded through tears, yes. Judge Caprio did not accept it immediately. "Help is not just money," he said. "It is paperwork, it is asking, it is showing up. It is letting other people know when you are at your limit before the steering wheel knows it. Can you do that?" Alina wiped her face and forced the words out clearly. Yes, Your Honor. Can you stop using anger to speak for fear? A long pause. Then quietly, I can try. He shook his head gently. No, try is what people say when they want credit in advance. I'm asking whether you will do it. The room leaned in again. Elena took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than her lungs. Yes, she said, I will. That answer mattered more than anything else she had said all day. And then Judge Caprio began to build a sentence no one in that room expected. Like this video, if you believe mercy means more when it still asks for change. First, he addressed the traffic violation. On the charge of failure to obey traffic control and unsafe operation, he said, the court finds the conduct serious. The footage is clear. Children and pedestrians were endangered. I am not dismissing that. Elena nodded, tears still falling. However, the court also finds extraordinary mitigating circumstances. Hospital discharge, documented shelter placement, active domestic violence fallout, medical needs of 2 children, and corroborating testimony from both the reporting officer and the pedestrian involved. He paused, then continued. I am reducing the monetary penalty on the moving violation to the statutory minimum with no late enhancement, contingent on completion of a defensive driving course within 60 days. Angela typed, I clee. Elena looked stunned. Then he turned to the registration issue. On the suspended registration, the court recognizes documented attempted payment and a remaining reinstatement fee of $48. I am giving Miss Rosario 30 days to provide proof of reinstatement. Upon proof, the court will waive all non-mandatory administrative surcharges tied to this matter. Prosecutor Donnelly nodded her agreement. Now the parking citations. The 3 medical zone parking tickets remain valid on paper, but law without context becomes laziness. 2 of these were directly connected to emergency pediatric and family care documented by hospital records. Those 2 are dismissed in the interest of justice. A murmur spread through the gallery. The 3rd, he continued, will be reduced to court costs only. Elena brought both hands to her face again. Still not done. Failure to appear on August 1 is vacated based on documented family medical necessity. Angela entered it. Judge Caprio looked down, then back up, and the final part of the ruling was the part that truly restored faith. Miss Rosario, I am also ordering that before you leave this building, you speak with the court resource coordinator and with Ms. Janelle Price from Safe Harbor, who has been contacted.